You've read the budgeting book, you've watched the videos, you've made the spreadsheet, colored in 3 neat categories, and told yourself this time you'd be different. And yet, somehow, 6 weeks later, you're right back where you started. If this sounds familiar, you're not broken. The advice was. Here's something almost nobody says out loud. Most financial advice isn't wrong. It's just built for a person who doesn't exist. A person with no emotional history around money. A person who makes decisions purely with logic every single time, with no exceptions. That person has never once opened a bank app because that person isn't real. You are real, and you didn't learn about money from a textbook. You learned about money the way you learned everything important, through moments. Small ones, mostly unnoticed at the time, that quietly wrote the rules you still follow today.
Think about the first time you remember money causing tension in your house. Maybe it was a hushed argument through a wall. Maybe it was a parent's face when a bill arrived. Maybe it was simpler than that, just a constant low hum of not quite enough. You weren't old enough to understand interest rates or budgets, but you were old enough to feel it. And feelings, unlike facts, don't disappear when you grow up. They just go quiet, waiting in the background of every decision you make.
This is the part generic advice skips entirely. It hands you a formula. 50% for needs, 30% for wants, 20% for savings. Clean, logical, completely useless if the real reason you're spending has nothing to do with math. Because here's the truth. Most spending isn't a math problem. It's an emotional one, wearing a math costume. Ask yourself something honest. The last time you bought something you didn't need, what were you actually feeling right before you bought it? Bored? Anxious? Overlooked at work? Exhausted from a day that gave you nothing back? That purchase wasn't really about the object. It was a shortcut to a feeling you were missing. Relief? Control? A small win in a day that otherwise handed you none. A generic budget doesn't know any of this. It just sees clothing, $120, and quietly judges you for going over the limit. It never asks the only question that actually matters. Why did you need that purchase in that exact moment? This is why the same advice can work beautifully for one person and completely fail for another, even with identical incomes. 2 people can earn the exact same salary and still have entirely different relationships with every dollar that passes through their hands. One learned that money means safety, so they hoard it anxiously, afraid to spend even when spending would be reasonable. The other learned that money means love, so they spend generously on people around them, sometimes at their own expense, because giving feels like connection. Neither person is doing math wrong. They're both doing emotional math, perfectly, according to rules they never consciously chose. Here's a question worth sitting with. If you pulled up your last 3 months of spending right now, what story would it tell about what you're actually seeking? Not what you're buying, what you're seeking underneath the buying.
Maybe the story is about control. Compulsive online shopping late at night often isn't really about the item in the cart. It's about being the one who decides something, anything, after a day where everything else felt decided for you. Maybe the story is about belonging. Spending beyond your means on group trips, dinners, or gifts often isn't about the money at all. It's about the fear of being the friend who says no and slowly gets left out. Maybe the story is about numbing. Impulse spending during moments of loneliness or boredom works almost exactly like a scroll through social media. A quick hit of stimulation to drown out a feeling that's actually asking for something else entirely. None of these patterns show up in a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet sees numbers leaving an account. It has no idea a person was trying to feel something or stop feeling something in that exact moment. This is why willpower alone rarely fixes spending problems for long. Willpower assumes the problem lives in the moment of the purchase, but the real problem usually started hours, sometimes years, before that purchase ever happened. You can't out-discipline a feeling you haven't identified.
So what actually works if generic rules don't? It starts with a slightly uncomfortable practice. Before spending on anything outside your basic needs, pause for 10 seconds and ask one question. What am I actually feeling right now? Not what am I buying, what am I feeling? This single pause interrupts something powerful. It moves the decision from an automatic reflex into a conscious choice. Sometimes the honest answer will be simple. You're hungry, and food is a reasonable, uncomplicated purchase. But sometimes the honest answer will surprise you. You're not hungry, you're lonely. And no amount of food actually fixes loneliness, even though it can feel like it will, for about 11 minutes. This is the layer traditional budgeting completely ignores, and it's exactly why so many people cycle endlessly between strict restriction and total burnout. They white-knuckle through a month of denying themselves everything, running purely on willpower with no emotional understanding underneath it. Then, the moment stress rises even slightly, the system collapses entirely, often in one single day, because the underlying feeling was never addressed. It was only ever suppressed. There's a second layer worth understanding here, too. Your beliefs about money were formed long before you had the capacity to question them. If you grew up hearing that money is the root of all evil, some part of you may unconsciously sabotage financial success, because deep down, being good and being wealthy feel like they're in conflict. If you grew up in scarcity, watching every dollar get stretched painfully thin, some part of you may hoard money out of pure fear, even at an income level where hoarding no longer makes logical sense. If you grew up watching money used as a reward or punishment, tied to good behavior or bad, spending or saving might still feel tangled up with self-worth today, even decades later. None of these beliefs are your fault. You didn't choose them. You absorbed them, the same way you absorbed a language before you ever had the ability to evaluate whether they were true. But absorbing them doesn't mean you're stuck with them forever. Naming a belief is often the first moment its grip starts to loosen. Here's something worth trying, quietly, on your own. Write down one sentence that completes this thought. To me, money means blank. Don't overthink it. Whatever shows up first is usually the most honest answer. Safety, freedom, stress, love, fear. Whatever word appeared, sit with it for a second. That single word is likely running more of your financial life than any spreadsheet ever could. This is why the advice that finally works for you probably won't look like advice at all at first. It'll look more like a question. Not cut your spending by 20%. Instead, what feeling are you actually chasing with this purchase? And is there a cheaper, healthier way to get that same feeling? If the honest answer is connection, maybe a phone call replaces an expensive dinner out. If the honest answer is control, maybe organizing one small area of your life gives you that same sense of order without spending a cent. If the honest answer is numbness, maybe a walk outside interrupts the urge just as effectively as a purchase would have, minus the bill that shows up later. None of this means budgets are useless. Structure still matters, but structure only works once it's paired with understanding. A budget without emotional awareness is like a diet without ever asking why you're actually hungry. It might work for a week. It rarely works for a lifetime. So the next time a piece of financial advice fails you, consider a different explanation than the one you've been telling yourself. It's not that you lack discipline. It's not that you're bad with money. It's that the advice was written for someone who doesn't carry a history, and you do. Every dollar you spend is passing through years of memory before it ever reaches your wallet. Understanding that history doesn't fix everything overnight, but it does something more valuable than any spreadsheet ever could. It turns spending from something that happens to you into something you finally get to choose. You've read the budgeting book. You've watched the videos. You've made the spreadsheet. Maybe the missing piece was never another rule. Maybe it was simply learning to ask yourself one honest question right before you reach for your wallet.